Hello, everybody, and welcome to this latest in the ValuesJam guest session series. Sylvie, brilliant to have you joining today. To start with, please share with everybody who you are and the great work that you do.
Great. So hi, everybody. My name is Sylvie Barbier. I'm half French, half Taiwanese, and I'm an artist and the co-founder of Life Itself. And so Life Itself is an organization dedicated into the question of how can we create a wiser, well world. And so we have a hub here in France, in Bergerac, where we run residency, where people co-live together and practice together of how can we live as a community in a wiser, well way. And we have a podcast and many other channels in which we do research, in which we inquire about how we can bring that into reality. So I like to call ourselves pragmatic utopians.
Wow, pragmatic utopians. What a lovely phrase that is. And you mentioned art, and before we started to record, you also mentioned music. So just tell me how that fits in.
Oh, well, I guess a long time ago, that word called culture engineering seemed very, very scary. And I want to really heal that word and that concept, because actually human being constantly engineer culture. That is we invent hip hop, or we invent rap, or a new form of dance. Like, we're constantly creating our culture. And so I'm quite fascinated into, well, what would be the next paradigm? What would be the next societies and its culture? And culture is often first formed through art. So for the way we dance, the songs we sing, the things we wear, the stories we tell ourselves. And so I think art is a great medium to communicate a vision of a different future, a vision where all human beings would pursue wisdom instead of material wealth. If people go in the street and you go and people ask them, oh, what's your vision of happiness? Often people want to pursue more money to be happy. But a revolution would be you sit in a cafe and say, oh, what do you pursue to be happy? It's like, I'm pursuing wisdom. That would be a paradigm shift. And so I want to create songs and dance and stories that helps ignite that sense of a new future where all of humanity really pursue wisdom as a path to fulfillment and happiness.
That's wonderful, Sylvie. And it strikes me, I sometimes think about how we get confused between the means and the end. And what I mean by that is that, often we have a clear end that we want to get to. And in order to arrive there, we put in place a means. But then we become all consumed with the means and we forget the end that we were aiming to get to in the first place. And it strikes me that that's very similar to what you've described, especially when you talk about something like happiness, because, we want happiness, but then we get all consumed with making loads of money in order to give us that happiness, which it never does. So, and I come back to pragmatic utopians. I love that. I'm going to be using that. So let's get into the ValuesJam card deck now. I'm going to tip the cards out. And how many piles of cards would you like me to make in front of me?
3.
3, okay. And would you like the left, the right, or the center card?
I'd like to, but I need to see it.
Well, you're not going to see the card, it's the pile. So there's this pile.
Okay, so I need to visualize the 3 piles. Okay. Never played the card on Zoom. The left pile.
The left pile. Well, I'm left-handed.
My left. So I don't know what.
Oh, you're left. Okay, so that's my pile.
Well, it should be your left then, I guess. But I don't know.
That's
Left pile.
So now I've got a pile with, I'm going to count the cards, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 21 cards. So if you give me a number between 1 and 21.
8.
8. Okay, and I'm going to give you 2 pieces of information now. The top card on the pile that you chose was actually this one. How spooky is that? And the card that you've actually chosen is recognition. So the first
Mm.
question, Sylvie, is this: what does recognition mean? And what does it look, feel, and sound like?
So what does recognition mean? And what does it feel, look, and sound like?
Yeah.
I think recognition is probably attached to a sense of being seen and a sense of justice. So to be recognized and to be identified. So, oh, I recognize this person, or I recognize this pattern. So it's related probably to identification and therefore being seen. Why I say also a sense of justice is like often there's a sense I'm not recognized, I'm not recognized. My work has not been recognized. And often a sense of therefore not being seen. So yeah, I would have a sense like that is related to identification of a person or pattern.
Interesting.
Feel what? And then you said, what does it feel like?
Look, feel, and sound like. Yeah. So, if you think about the word recognition, what images come to mind, what sounds come to mind, and what feelings come to mind?
Well, when a person does feel recognized, they probably feel a sense of belonging, of safety, but and maybe not pride, but I would definitely say a sense of belonging.
Mm-hmm.
Feel, look like, what does it look like? Um, yeah, I think belonging is the stronger one that comes to me.
Okay. And then just tapping into your musical self, any sounds in particular that you associate with the word recognition?
No, not particularly like, well, it's the same auditively, you can recognize someone's voice and things like that. But I was like, oh, sometimes you don't, in our society, in many cities that became huge and therefore very anonymous, there's a desire to not be able to be recognized, to be anonymous. And it's very related to our sense of like freedom. You were just mentioning like, oh, people confuse means and ends regarding happiness and money. My interest in wisdom is that seems that people who are wise seems to be a lot happier, you know. Um, and in regards to recognition, yes, that sense of there's a desire freedom, and often freedom to have anything we want versus freedom of being. And often we have the illusion that, oh, by being anonymous in a place where no one knows me, I can be whoever I want, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because there's no one who knows me, so I can reinvent myself and be whoever I want. um but then you feel extremely lonely because you're not recognized. you
Yeah.
know you might be free to be whoever you want, or have the illusion that you can be free whoever you want, but then the other side is you feel very lonely because you're not recognized. So I would say recognition is also the other facet of being anonymous. The opposition would be to be anonymous, not recognizable, being nobody. And so there's a double edge, because I think we pursue wanting to be able to be anyone. But if you can be anyone, and then you're nobody. But then if you're nobody, then you don't belong.
I love
And
where
then you're lonely.
love where this is going, Sylvie, because isn't it fascinating how the same word recognition has those two meanings that we're touching on? One is this identification, and I recognize you. I remember what you look like and I recognize you. And then at the other end of the scale, or maybe it's not even a scale, is this whole thing around, I value you and you belong and I recognize you in that sense, which is, I guess the first one is more technical recognition, and the latter one is more emotional, maybe. And that's a distinction between the two applications of the same word. And I agree with what you said about this whole thing around anonymity, because, like you say, I'm just thinking, for instance, of young people in the summer on a party type holiday, maybe behaving not the best, because they feel this sense of anonymity and they can do what they want to do. But at the same time, they are then no one and not themselves. So I'm curious about, what is it that causes us to feel that sense of freedom in, I guess, escaping judgment of others, and why is it so important?
Well, it's a bit of a very, very funny thing that you're saying. Is like, yeah, so there was a desire. I think what led our society to become quite individualistic and anonymous is wanting to run away from judgment and oppression. And so there's a good reason. I mean, like, you look at certain places in the world where people would get killed for being gay or for just being a woman, or they're just for however reason. You're like, well, that's a good reason we became quite individualistic. But then and so where you could have a space to be free. But funny enough, I went clubbing not that long ago, which was a lot of fun. And it was very funny to see lots of 20-something years old. And they're not so free because they are free of the judgment of the people they don't know. And for human being to be around people you don't know is actually quite stressful. Like, to be around people you don't know is kind of bizarre if you really think about it. Like, there's something kind of really deranged that we're constantly with people we don't know. And of course, there's a kind of agreement of how, what is okay behavior that allows you to do that. But when there used to be not so many human beings on Earth, like, if you'd see someone you don't know, that was a major event, that was like, whoa, and you had no idea if you could trust them, like it was. And so what I mean is when you see those young people who go clubbing with lots of people they don't know, they actually don't feel very safe and relaxed because they also don't know if they're going to be accepted by these strangers.
Yeah.
So like the desire of feeling safe, you could have like the thing is, I think you could pursue it with strangers, you could pursue it with people you do know, but I think there's a strong a desire and need for human being to grow, like to feel safe. It's very hard for a being to deploy themselves and to grow into themselves and to experiment if they don't feel safe.
And
so regardless, you feel safe with strangers and you're anonymous, or you feel safe with your grandparents or your parents, go have a drink with and get completely drunk in front of your parents, like the need, or get drunk with people you don't know. Like, I think the key thing is being able to feel safe and accepted as you are. Not that you won't be judged, but I think ultimately more like you're accepted as you are.
And there's something here coming up for me, because actually I sometimes find it easier to be with strangers than I do to be with people that I know. And I think that's partly because I quite enjoy an understanding that there's no baggage. So when you're with a stranger, you are taken for what you are from that moment that you start the interaction, because there's no other reference to draw on. Whereas when you're with people, there's always this filter of their experience of you previously, and who knows what that is doing. So I quite enjoy a conversation with a stranger because it feels as though, and that, yeah, and I would add to that, as long as you feel safe. And I'm naturally quite trusting, so I tend to trust until it's proven that I shouldn't have done it, which does happen from time to time.
Yes, and that's what modernity has given us, the luxury of being anonymous, It's a wonderful joy in that. But also you have a huge increase, like massive increase of like loneliness. And it's very hard to have both, it's really hard to have both. And also it's like who does not enjoy, a fresh young love, when you just met someone and it's all new and exciting. It's the same with meeting a stranger. Oh, it's all new and exciting. But the real transformational work is with, like all your baggage. Your baggage are still there, and that person's baggage is still there. It's just you can't see it as much because it's all new and fresh. But I think there's a great value in the being recognized, and not being locked, that your past, that you're not locked by your past, prisoned by it, with the people who know you. And it's the same, like it's a really hard one to do. Like, I just see my mom. I have so much past with my mom of like how I listen to her. I have so much past of how I react to her. And so the work is like, can I listen to my mom newly?
And there's also, Sylvie, that whole thing around, so we've used the term baggage, which strikes me as being more negative than it need be, actually, because the past is the past, right? It's not necessarily baggage. But what I wanted to say is that the other dynamic around this is that there's your view of the past, and then there's somebody else's view of your past, which might not actually match. And no, you don't know whether there is a match there or not, because often it's unspoken. You don't actually talk about it. One person has one perception, and the other person has perhaps the same perception, or perhaps a slightly different perception, or a completely different perception. And when you know people, sometimes that just remains unsaid.
Yes. What a shame.
It is. So let's
What a shame not go and inquire. And often we don't want to inquire because we don't want to discover that maybe we were wrong. Maybe our perception were wrong. And then it brings up a lot of emotion about it, especially the past becomes baggage if you haven't cleaned up your crap, right?
Yeah.
Like that's the past is not just the past. The past becomes baggage if you don't do the work of cleaning up the crap, and then it becomes baggage.
Yeah.
And sometimes cleaning up the crap, sometimes it takes a several go to really clean up and catching yourself. Like I know, I can get really concrete. Like recently I just saw like, oh, I get easily annoyed. I have like already always listening, which is annoyed. I laugh. It's like, and I actually saw my dad. I was like, oh, my dad is also a bit like that. That's why him and I understand each other so well. And it has a real impact on my husband and my family that, I listen from, here you go, annoyed, here you go, they don't get me. Here you go, here it comes again. And I have to catch myself. And I said, he's like, you're allowed to tell me that I'm getting annoyed. So I have to like, watch myself, what's coming up, has nothing, even if the person might be annoying, so what?
Well, yeah, and this goes back to when you were talking about how we have become very individualistic, and a lot of society's systems encourage us to be individualistic. And so, no surprise that that's how a lot of people are. And then we're just talking here about how, so what if you're annoying? And there's also this tendency in society of painting this perfect picture of what you're supposed to be like. And so, you've got this one individual and then this picture of perfection that everybody should strive towards. And that kind of does down this whole thing around, well, the past is just the past. You don't have to judge it. Annoying is fine. It's just part of who we are. Why is that a problem? So there just seems to be, and again, a word that you used earlier, this acceptance. There seems to be a pretty low level of acceptance of us as human beings with all of our complexity and imperfection.
Well, we have all of that because we're individual. With modernity came the death of God. And that meant that the new God was the ego.
Yeah.
And my individuality, what I want, what I prefer. And it's a life with therefore very little problem because the ego is very small, right? And so your problems are very small, your focus is very small. And I would say that one thing that leads to a lot of dissatisfaction, and you look at the internet and people are like very concerned about how they look like, or their self-image, they're looking good, which is very normal to human being, but it's like you need to have a problem big enough worthy of you. You want to have big problems, not little problems, have a problem worthy of that life, and it's a practice, and it's very hard to have a problem worthy of your life if all you have is that you're the most important thing. All your focus is that your happiness is what is the most important. You're never going to have a very big problem if you think the focus is you and your happiness.
Yeah, dead right. And that's why I love being in nature, because when you're in an ancient woodland, for instance, or if you're on the side of a mountain, or if you're in the sea, I just love how that reminds us that we're just this tiny little speck, and it's pretty insignificant at the end of the day compared to the magnitude of nature that we can sometimes be in, which is that I think a really helpful antidote to what you've just described. So let's move to a more of a kind of grounded question next, which is where have you noticed a lack of recognition?
Oh, where have I noticed a lack of recognition? So I think there's a lack of recognition in the things that are not seen as sexy. And what I'm going to say, for example, we all love, and they are work to be recognized, the individual hero, like the fireman, the nurse, the teacher, they're up. But you watch Grey's Anatomy, it's about those doctors in the operating room saving individual life. But what about the epidemiologist? The guy who's over there, who's no one sees, but him sorting out, now it's gonna get very but him sorting, understanding the greater wave, these human beings, these type of people who look more at the system, who look more at the underground tectonic plate that moves our society. These are often not very recognized, you know. We like there's certain functions or roles that are very shiny and they are more easily recognized. Oh, I saved this I saved this animal, this person. Like you can film it. Also, what is visual, you know, like we in a digital society, we're also very drawn with things that are very fast and visual. But there are certain things that are extremely valuable, that are far less visible, that really go and look at the source of things. And I think we don't recognize quality as much. Quality of thinking, you know, like everybody's is more about who's the loudest than who has the most followers, who has the most visibility, versus who has a deeper thinking, in the sense, deeper thinking, really looking deeply to seek the root cause of problems, but also the truth, to really aim to really get to the truth of it. And I would say that this type of work is not very recognized.
Yeah, and do you think that's something to do with is it something to do with us being superficial? You know, because what I think what you just said strikes a chord with me, where people, you know, see somebody saving a life and it's like, oh, I can recognize that, aren't they wonderful? But actually we don't bother to ask the questions that, well, what enabled that person to be there in that position with that knowledge to be able to perform that act and all of this? So
yeah, say that you see it maybe in it's like often it's easier to raise money to build a school, so the building of a school, than to raise money to pay the teachers. Right? Like in the sense that, oh, the building is something visible, like I can see it, I see where my money goes, you know, like, but really paying the teacher to have lots of teacher training, like that's a lot less, like there's a sense of it being less visible. And that's what I'm saying, is that there's we value things that we can see and touch, but they're actually probably not the most valuable thing.
Yeah. Are you familiar with he's a British guy, but he's in the US, Simon Sinek. And are you familiar with his work? So he I'll send you a link to a video where he talks about the difference between intensity and consistency. And I think it's what we're touching on here. And so from the business world, he gives the example of, you know, you have your annual corporate leadership conference. So the top few hundred people from the company go to a place and they have motivational speakers and meetings, really important things, and then they go back to work. But there was a budget for it, there was a plan for it, there was a big rah-rah. And yet there's the business as usual that happens every day in the business that really doesn't get the recognition and appreciation. And he draws a parallel with oral hygiene, where he says, you know, you book your annual checkup with the dentist and it hurts because you've had to pay the money and you've got it in your calendar and you get your teeth cleaned, so you've got shiny white teeth for a while. But is that what stops your teeth falling out? Well, no, it's not. It's the cleaning them twice a day, 2 minutes each time. How many times can I miss it? I don't know. So it's this whole thing around how we seem to be able to attach value to those shiny, loud things and really don't recognize the quieter stuff that is just there all the time.
Yes. We value the key, like let's say it's keynote speaker, but who did all the spreadsheet and the ops and the cleaning the toilet and all of that, and these things are very valuable and not often recognized.
Yeah, I mean you're touching my world now, or my ex-world, I suppose I should call it, because my original career was in commercial hospitality management. So I used to run 5-star hotels and conference centers, that sort of thing. And one of my passions is for every single person in those establishments to feel valued and important in the role that they play in the end service that's delivered. And I still use this story now. I tell us, it's like, imagine that you go to the finest restaurant in the city and it's got beautiful decor, fantastic service. The chef is renowned, and you're seated at your table and you pick up the fork and you notice there is hardened egg yolk on it. And this is because some guy hasn't done their job right cleaning the fork. And when you see that, the whole thing is broken, because of that person not doing their job. So I really like where you've gone here with this whole thing around the stuff that you don't see and the stuff that is quieter, maybe being deserving of more recognition. And I guess the question that's coming is, well, why not? Is it because it just doesn't demand that attention? Is it because we can't be bothered?
Well, I on that other note, but related, is that I think, for example, we often prefer to keep things nice versus telling the truth, because then people would get offended. And in that way, we value more niceness versus the truth or quality, because and you might be right or wrong, but there's something of a culture like, we don't like conflict, we want to maintain the status. Like, we know the status quo might not be working, but it's better to maintain it versus like having a bit of a row. But I do think there is something of related to it does demand to an effort to inquire for yourself.
Yeah.
It does demand an effort. And that's, I speak of democracy is a growth step culturally as an organization of a society than an authoritarian dictatorship. Because if you're in an authoritarian dictatorship, and you can have very benevolent one or non-benevolent one, it's like you're in a very father-child dynamic. You either have a great daddy who looks after you really well, or you have a really shit daddy that looks after you really poorly and beats you up. But the advantage of a daddy is you're a child, you don't have to take responsibility. He has to do the thinking.
Yeah. Yep.
If you're now a democracy, now you have a seat at a table, and that demands that you do some of the work, that you have to be responsible. And so to be responsible, you have to take on doing the work of thinking for yourself and analyzing for yourself, of being a bit maybe offended by people's views and values and opinions. You need to engage. And so it's amazing, our society as a whole has become a democracy, like in the West as a democracy, but it's actually maybe still quite fresh, and we're maybe not yet very mature in practicing democracy, which really means, that's why we had education to a certain extent, but the education we need is not just to learn to read and count, is really to learn how to really inquire and seek for yourself. And so that so that you can grow into a citizen, into a person who has a right to be at the table, and a right to it is a right, it's not, people fought for it, and it's still something fresh. And so it's something that we need to grow our maturity to be able to practice that.
Yeah, no, you're making me wonder whether we are, I don't know whether the word is mature. I'm not sure it is. Maybe it's equipped is a better word for democracy in many countries, because it seems to me that we try to operate with the tool of democracy, but actually the people that are charged with that responsibility are not equipped or skilled enough to be able to do it. And so you end up with something that it's kind of it might even be worse than not having democracy in the first place.
I now will really, for someone, you live in a democratic country and you have that luxury. And to say that it might be worse is that you have not put your foot on the undemocratic soil. And really, because it's I get triggered because I'm half French, half Taiwanese. And to be Taiwanese in this environment, no, yes, we're not perfect as a democracy. Of course, there's still so much we can grow. But there's no way we can compare, let's say, China or Russia with England and America. Like we have, it's incredible what we have, and we shall not take it for granted. Now, can we do better? Can we mature in how we practice ourselves as citizen, our democracy? Yes, hell yes, there's something we can grow in that. But to think that, you know, another daddy could come and he would be a better daddy and he would know better than us, you know, that's also wishful thinking. And wishful thinking is like very dangerous, because it's thinking there's a hero out there that's going to save us today, or there's another thing that is better out there that is going to make it better. It's you and I. This is it. This is it. And we're perfect. We're right for this job. Because if we have this job, is because we can grow to it. Life gives you the challenge you need to grow. Like, this is an opportunity for us to grow as human being and for us to grow as a civilization. It's the challenge is hard, but it's only hard because there's a huge opportunity for us as a society.
Yeah. And so in ValuesJam, there's a chance for you to ask your own question about recognition. So let's move to this, and we'll deal with that reasonably quickly before we draw this ValuesJam to a close. So on the topic of recognition, Sylvie, ask your own question, beginning with who, what, where, when, why, or how. And the question is asked to both of us. And either you can answer your own question first, or else I can have a go and then you can respond.
So I can ask you a question, right?
Yeah, if you'd like to.
Who, what, where?
When, why, or how?
How would you like politicians to be recognized?
I would like politicians to be recognized by two measures. One is the general well-being in their society of their citizens. And the second is the state of, or no, the existence of the most vulnerable people in that society. So what I'm saying is that if a politician, through their decisions, was able to give the most vulnerable people in society the best life they could have, and would strive for well-being of their citizens, then they would receive praise. And if they couldn't do that, they would be replaced.
Darn it.
What about you?
Well, I think politicians is related to leadership. And leadership is very dangerous. People die. You know, you take great leaders, politician leader, they got killed. But there's also something about politicians that for me is really important, is being able to make the tough, unpopular calls. that might actually get them not reelected. That's the difficulty with the democratic system. Which is therefore really related also to the people being educated, being able to really think for themselves, but not just think for themselves, having an opinion, because everybody can have an opinion. My 4-year-old has an opinion about everything, you know. So it's not about having an opinion, it's about being able to look for, inquire. And yeah, being able to make the tough calls, because, you know, our society is growing more and more on like it is difficult, because I think the our politician is a reflection of us. You know, they're not something out there. They're, yes, I think that's what I would like to be recognized in politician, is politicians are us. The quality of our politician is just a reflection of us. So in a way, to kind of, not saying we should hold them accountable, definitely, but also to start being responsible of like, oh, it's not that they're corrupt or bad or anything. They might actually be far less corrupt than in the 50s, you know, but we give them much more shit for it. Sorry, I just sweared, but we gave them more difficult time than in the 50s. And to just be like, oh, if we want a level up, we got to level up. And to recognize that it's not the whole political system or politician, their quality or what they do, is like they don't pass certain bills because they believe we won't approve it. You know, I don't think, for example, passing a carbon tax, you know, a aggressive carbon tax to deal with climate crisis currently would be approved. Like people would really row against it. So it's not that it's out there. That's why I'd like it to be recognized in terms of politician work, because the politician work can only do as so much as we let them do, so much as we trust them. And I think there's what makes politics, to recognize that what currently makes politics really hard is that we have such a lack of trust. We have such a lack of trust in ourselves as a culture, as a civilization, and therefore, of course, in our politicians. And it's really hard to do anything when people don't trust you. Like you can try as hard as you want when there's such a break of trust in the social fabric. It's really hard, and it's not just to recognize like, oh, to just recognize the problem, to just being able to identify it and put a name on that. For me, that's the thing of like being able to recognize that there is no shortcut also to politics, because politics is human beings. It's human beings coming together, making decisions together. No AI is going to do that work for us, because that would mean wanting to not be human being. That would mean wanting to outsource our humanity, and to recognize, oh, that's the opportunity, and that's the hard work. We need to come together and talk and try to make sense together of the world and try to come to agreement. And it's difficult as hell, but it's possible. And it's possible because so far a lot of the views is like, oh, let's have some NGO do it. Let's have some company, non-for-profit, no, not for, like a social entrepreneurship do it. Let's have AI do it. Like, versus believing in the state, versus believing in politics, that we together, we the citizen, can come together and create and do something great together again. Like I always say, we should have t-shirts that says politics is great again, because like now the top, like most of the people who comes out of the elite universities of Oxford, Cambridge, and etc., they don't go to public office. This is a shame. That should be the dream. In the past, it was people's dream. It's like, okay, I'm going to serve, you know, I'm going to put my life in service. And now it's like, you know, I'm going to make some big bucks in a, you know, financial firm, and, you know, buy myself a nice big fancy flat. And there's something of the shift of, I think we need to re-believe in the politics, in people. And because what is politics is believing in people.
And wouldn't it be great if our politicians, like you have said, wouldn't it be great if they were a reflection of us? But in too many countries, actually, they're not, because despite the fact that people maybe don't want to go into public office, the fact of the matter is that many leaders do come from those elite, privileged education backgrounds, and so they're not really much of a reflection of their wider society. And then the other thing, I think, from a politician's point of view, is for them to recognize the importance of the role that they're leading or performing and the impact on society when their behavior falls short of what it should be. Because then, and I'm not saying that this is easy for them, it absolutely is not when you're in the spotlight as much as these people are. But for instance, in the UK, some of the behavior that's happened over the last 2 or 3 years by the most senior leaders in the country is just deplorable. And then should we be surprised when young teenagers in different parts of the country are misbehaving when they see that the leaders of their country have been misbehaving? It shouldn't surprise us, I don't think. I feel like we've kind of just started the conversation rather than bringing it to a close, but we do need to do that because I'm just mindful of time. And there's one final question for you, Sylvie, and it can be a short answer. So what are you encouraged to do differently about recognition as a result of our conversation today?
What do I aim to do differently about recognition?
What are you encouraged to do differently?
Everybody wants to be recognized. Oh, sorry. So you didn't have the ring bell, but everybody wants to be recognized, you know? Everybody wants to be seen and valued.
And so in that spirit, what are you encouraged to do differently?
Take more time with, I'm not sure that it would be differently, but more like confirming to continue.
Okay.
Yes, it's not like, oh, suddenly, you know what, I haven't done this and I forgot to, but it's more to continue to recognize one another and take the time to do that. You know, like, you're me, I'm you, we're the same. Stop beating each other up.
Yeah. And I think mine is quite similar. And I'm reminded, I don't know if you're familiar with the phrase Sawubona. So Sawubona is a Zulu greeting. And it's what they say when they meet somebody, Sawubona. And the literal translation into English is actually in the plural. And it's we see you. And the reason
Yes.
that are you familiar with this already?
Yes, a little bit. Yes. There's
Okay.
a different saying, but the same essence to it.
Yeah. And so the way that it was described to me, which I just love to bits, is that the reason it's plural, we see you, is because they say that when you meet somebody, you look into their eyes, not only with your own eyes, but with the eyes of all of your ancestors before you. And there's just something really, I can feel my heart kind of getting a bit bigger here inside. It's this, I'm really looking at you and I'm seeing you, rather than the more typical Western, hi, how are you? And you don't really want an answer because you're out of the door before the person starts to give their answer. So, Sylvie, thank you so much for today, and thank you for choosing the card of recognition. I'm conscious that we went into the world of politics, which they say you should always avoid, don't you know? But I really enjoyed
That's not true. That's how it happens. You gotta not shy away.
it. Quite right. Let's do that. Let's do that. So thank you very much. And you're now a qualified values jammer.
Thank you.
Bye, Sylvie.
Bye.